everybody started to ask me, do you think this diversification thing's going to stick? Are we going to stay with this? Is it real? And it is, because we've recognized we are still, we still play in a global market from an energy standpoint, but we're still price takers. We're still, we're far from markets.
Yes,
we all of a sudden have realized how unreliable our primary market
Never more
is.
prominent than it is.
And so, that conversation's not going away.
Hello and a warm Collisions YYC welcome. I have practiced that 499 times leading up to today. So Deborah, thank you for joining me for episode 500. We're at the Garrett on Stephen Avenue, which is we were just talking about we could actually camp out here.
Yeah, we could. It's a beautiful loft, yeah.
I was thinking long and hard of who I'm going to have on episode 500, and your name came to top of the list, not only because your involvement in our community, I've known you for the past bunch of years, seeing you out and about, hearing you speak, but your history from a reporting perspective, being involved in the business community and being involved with the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, which I'm all proud of my 5 years of podcasting, but the Chamber's been around since 1891.
Yes, we are.
And you have not been, you've only been the last
No, I'm not that old.
That did not come out right. How long have you been with the Chamber?
I've been since July of 2021. So still a little bit of COVID.
And you were with the university before that?
I was a chancellor of the university. I actually had an overlap of that position for a year. So I was holding two jobs at the same time. One, of course, the chancellor's role.
Wasn't that a COVID thing? Did they both know?
They both knew. They absolutely knew. Chancellor's role is a volunteer role. And we call ourselves a 134-year-old startup. We run lean, fast, and responsive to the market and to our members.
You beat me to describe the startup in that conversation. Yeah. And you were involved, obviously you've been a business reporter, news reporter. You've been in it. Have you been in, I think New York, if I dig back? I was creeping on your LinkedIn.
Yeah,
New York. I'm a professional creeper. How long have you been in Calgary?
I've been in Calgary since 1992.
Okay,
yeah.
so I've been here since 2000. So we've been here for a while, but you got me beat by far.
Yeah, but I grew up in Edmonton. So,
so this was coming back around.
Yeah, coming back around. I often say I grew up in Peter Lougheed's Alberta.
Okay.
So I was of that generation that really saw that his leadership and his vision for the province from a diversification standpoint, from a development standpoint. He was the first premier to have an arts and culture minister when he developed his cabinet.
Interesting.
So, Lougheed was very, very forward-looking and talked about diversification. If you read his speeches from the 70s, you'll see that he was talking about who else can we sell our oil and gas production to. He was very interested in Japan. He's very focused on our agriculture, very worried about water. And that's the 70s. And here we are today.
That doesn't sound a lot different.
No, it doesn't.
And we sound like we still have the similar concerns.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I think about 5 years ago, 2019, we were chatting a little bit off air about, that 13 to 19, a little bit of an energy winter, maybe, can we call it?
Yeah, winter, yeah.
And I say this very reluctantly and very respectfully, but I do feel that downturn helped us in a lot of ways. If I think to maybe where we are now, and sure, we can always be better. I think we're all addicted to the be better. That did seem like it moved some of that diversification story forward.
Well, going back to what Lougheed talked about, right,
Yeah.
in the 70s, and that was sort of an undertone of many conversations. But every time we saw a downturn in the energy prices, whether it was oil or natural gas, and mostly oil, the diversification conversation would come forward, and then energy prices would respond and rebound, and it would go quiet. And when oil prices did crash in 2014, 2015, that mentality really took hold in the city. And it was really the courage of one individual who decided that we needed to establish a creative destruction labs chapter at the University of Calgary, which the idea was, it was developed in Toronto by Ajay Agrawal. And his idea was that you could start and support these companies in Canada and help them get mentored and financed so they didn't have to go to the Valley. So this was a way to keep that.
You didn't have to leave.
You didn't have to leave. You could keep that innovation going, you could keep the companies going, and let's get the same idea going in Calgary. And in one night, a group of individuals raised the money they needed to establish the CDL Rockies chapter at the Haskayne School of Business at the university, and it is now the most successful chapter in the CDL ecosystem.
That is such a great story. That doesn't always, in classic Calgary fashion, we don't always tell our stories loud enough.
No, we don't. And what was interesting, because as things started to rebound, and we saw a resurgence in the oil price and stronger natural gas prices and the promise of LNG off the West Coast, everybody started to ask me, do you think this diversification thing's going to stick? Are we going to stay with this? Is it real? And it is, because we've recognized We are still, we still play in a global market from an energy standpoint, but we're still price takers. We're still, we're far from markets.
Yes,
we
we are.
all of a sudden have realized how unreliable our primary market is.
Never more prominent than it is
And
right
so,
today.
that conversation's not going away.
When did CDL actually get established? What was it?
2017 was its first year.
Okay,
And
so kind of right in the dark days.
Yeah, right in the
to
dark
over-dramatize
days.
it a little bit, but it was pretty dark.
It was pretty dark. And I would say what was fantastic was there were all these people that were sort of energy executive exits, people who had sort of said, I'm
They had
done.
done well.
They'd
They'd
done
done well
well.
by it.
They were sort of thinking about their next chapter. Some of them were part of the money raised to get it off the ground, and were able to spend time and also support those startups. The creation of family offices and that whole ecosystem, that angel capital ecosystem, really took hold around that time as well.
Not that this is a sales pitch for CDL, but what about that formula that really works in your mind? Like,
I think
right thing, right time, but also right people?
right people, right thing, right time, and
Big enough checkbooks?
all of it helps.
Yeah.
But I also think you have a very interesting paradigm, I guess, in Calgary, in that you had, we came through this royalty trust period where companies were created and sold to bigger producers. A lot of people made a lot of money. And then they were able to sort of walk away at a younger age. Some have stayed in Calgary. A lot of them are at that CDL table. Others have left. That's their decision. But the point is there was time for mentorship, and there was time, and there was also money to support these individuals. And it's
There
a
is
huge,
a formula. There's a triangle.
it's a
Yeah.
huge time commitment for people who do choose to get involved.
You talked about people leaving. I remember, I think it was early 2000s, there was quite a bit of news coverage at the time of the brain drain.
Yeah.
Students leaving.
Yep.
Has that come around in your mind? 'Cause I think it has, but again, it all depends who you talk to on what day.
So it's actually an interesting story
Okay.
because I think that I remember going to speeches that former Mayor Naheed Nenshi was giving and saying, we've got to stop people using Calgary as an ATM. They're coming here, they're making money, and then they're leaving. How do we make that? How do we change that? And I think when the oil price did crash, there was an expectation we'd see, the real estate values decline and a lot of people leave because they had to go find something else to do somewhere else. That didn't happen. People stayed here. They obviously had embedded themselves in the community. They felt that this was a place that was going to come through the challenges. A lot of people did commute. They stayed in Calgary and they would fly for jobs that they found elsewhere. And that was different than what happened in the 80s. Right, when people did leave, and in the 90s as well.
I've heard that story so many times. Like, oh my God, I was here in the 80s. I had a 20% mortgage and I had no job, and the whole thing kind of fell apart.
Yeah, and so I think there's the brain drain. But there's a bit of a reverse conversation right now, because what we're seeing is because we don't have enough spots for students in the post-secondary system, a lot of young people are leaving and studying elsewhere. And if they do that, it's really hard to bring them back here. So just for context, we need about 30,000 new post-secondary spots in Alberta by 2030. And
That's a legit number.
and that's before we had the influx of 100,000 people into Calgary last year. And so, we have to think about how do we help people who are here to stay, but also how do we create the space for that young generation to be able to study here and not leave the province.
And is that just simply as just more investment in our education system?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, we need to do that. We need to create more spaces for education. We need to stop thinking about education as an expense. It is
maybe an investment?
It's an investment in the future
Real
of this
sales
province.
pitch today we are.
Oh yeah, no, you know
Well,
what?
let's spin that on its head.
I'm the
And
daughter of
assuming-
educators.
Okay, so it's ingrained in your soul.
It's ingrained in who I am.
But again, post-secondary, but across the board, from
Yeah.
technical, like right across the board.
Yeah, we need to see that. So I think that
That's
people
interesting. I've
always
not heard that.
people always look for opportunities elsewhere. But I think that we are seeing a lot of people looking for opportunity in Alberta and in Calgary, because this is a city where it really doesn't matter where you come from. It's really what can you do.
I've always believed that if you can provide value, someone will give you an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And that's not the same everywhere.
Nope.
Who do you know, and who's your uncle, and who's your aunt, and how
Yeah.
do you, I grew up back east, there's a little more of that. There's a few more layers.
Yeah.
Where Calgary, and I appreciate, once you're in, it feels like the door's open.
Yeah.
And I've heard sometimes getting over the wall, but if you can provide value here, like even myself, what I built here, I would have had a very different journey if I would have stayed in Toronto or Montreal.
No, I think
No question.
we have. I call it a coffee culture.
Okay.
When I first came to Calgary, first summer I was here as a summer student in 1990. There was one cafe that was open till midnight. Coming from Toronto, coming from New York.
Bit of a culture shock.
That was a huge shock for me. It's like, what do you mean? There's only one place open till midnight. Still open, Cafe Vino, not open till midnight anymore. But
I didn't know it's been there that long.
yeah. It had
that's
opened just
cool.
before 1990, I think, 80s. It was a couple of years old when I got here.
Probably looks pretty much the same as it.
Coffee's great. Those Vino blend beans.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's awesome.
But so the coffee culture. So we got more cafes. But the point is, people are willing to meet you for coffee.
Yeah.
And you're one call away from finding the person you need to connect to for coffee if you have an idea. And people are willing to hear your ideas. It's a very open city in that way.
That is one of our superpowers.
It is, absolutely.
That's the big small town thing
Yeah.
to play. Like,
It
I might
is.
not be able to help you, but if you're clear on what you can offer, I'll introduce you to somebody.
Absolutely.
And they'll do it.
Yes.
That's the,
Yep.
my buddy had a friend here, done a lot of business here, moved to Vancouver, and used to call it the Van Groovy Special. Yeah, I'll introduce you, and never hear
Never
from
happens.
him again.
Oh, that's so
He goes,
funny.
And he had a culture shock, because in Calgary, if someone said they'd introduce you,
Yeah.
they would actually do it.
And then you have to
And he went to
follow up.
Toronto, and he had kind of a similar story. He was very colorful about it, but I always remember his like winks and guns. Yeah, I
Yeah.
got you, and then never
Yeah.
follow through, where Calgary's not like that.
No. But then you have to follow through. As the person
Do
who
what
was
you
asked for
say.
them, yeah.
Well, that's the fundamentals. Dude,
Yeah.
come on. It's just good hygiene. Do what you
Yeah.
do what you say. So we think about 2018, 2019. I started the podcast in 19, thinking about that period of time where there was little pockets of things going on. My own take on it. There just wasn't as many concentric circles as maybe there are now. And
Yeah.
I was at the CD, the report to the community last week, and
Yeah.
we still need to collaborate.
Yeah.
I agree, and I still think we're doing better than we were.
Yeah.
If you look back at where people say, well, there was a tech sector 5 years ago, but now it's bigger and there's more overlaps. What's your perspective on, are we getting better at that, or am I just talking to the people that are optimistic about it?
So, it's interesting you say that because when the oil price crashed, I was still writing for the Calgary Herald.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would do was I made it my sort of mission to find out what else was going on in the city.
Nice.
And for a while, I'd perch at the Nucleus building, which was the old Calgary Chamber of Commerce building,
Okay.
right beside the Bow building. And I would they gave me a desk, and I'd just sit there and talk to people who were working and what they were doing.
Basically hanging out in the plus 15.
Hanging out to hear that tech
Yeah,
world,
what's
right?
going on,
And
yeah.
at that point, I always said there were a lot of drops, but we didn't have a puddle yet. A lot of little pieces starting to fall, but we didn't have that sort of critical mass. And I would say platform was really important in coalescing what's going on. When you think they have something like 1,300 companies that are now sort of calling platform home, and people know that that's one of
It's a real number. That's
it's a real number.
Yeah.
It is the ecosystem. They know that there is, that there are connections that can be made. You have U.S. companies like Plug and Play that have come and set up shop here.
Yep.
But a lot of places that have come here because they see the talent and the opportunity and the openness for their particular line of business. Emphasis is another example. So it's. I think in total we have 60,000 people employed in tech right now in Calgary.
Is that the number?
It's that's not insignificant,
No.
and really that was not. And they're colliding.
Which I
Right,
love.
right. You love that.
Yeah, I
and,
do.
and
I
they're,
do.
They're bumping into one
it's
another.
Kind of what is it? The second floor and below, the 15 feet from the street is where
Yeah.
things happen.
Yeah.
I remember when Terry came on the show way back, and we talked about the original diversification mandate from the 80s. He's like, Tyler, we're going to do it. We're going to build this. It's going to be like a parking crash. And I'm like, what are you talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah. Well,
And now you can drive by and see it.
Yeah.
In that period of time, I think it's so easy. Also, we just start to accept it. Oh, it's always been there. It wasn't. There was a time when
No.
that was an idea.
it was an idea, and it was
And
also
ideas are great, but someone's got to execute.
well, and it was also, it was dispersed, right? So there
Yeah.
was a nucleus building, and then there was something else, and there was people were all over the place, and now there's one focal point, arguably. There's other things going on, but that is a very important part of the tech ecosystem in Calgary.
What are your thoughts on, because you live in it, downtown? That got hollowed out pretty bad, and I know depends how optimistic you want to be, but that's still a real thing in Alberta.
It's a
Or
real
in
thing.
Calgary, so call a spade in Calgary. What's your perspective on that?
It's a real thing everywhere.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah,
is,
fair enough.
we're not unique. And it is, just even
We're not
walk-
special.
No.
Probably, which is better in this situation.
The city's doing what it can. The
Yeah.
province is doing what it can. We're fighting something that is bigger than all of us. It is mental health related. It is substance abuse related. We know the interconnection between the two. It's also housing related.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of pieces that have to be addressed in order to move us forward and really look at how we can eliminate the suffering that we see on a day-to-day basis. I walked here from my office at the Ampersand. It's
Yes.
hard. It's really, really
It's different
hard.
than it was
'cause
5 years ago. for
These
sure.
are people's kids, uncles, mothers. And it just breaks your heart and you just wonder, what happened?
And is this big city problems? And that's not to minimize it, but it feels like, oh, downtown Toronto, Montreal's different, it's got a different thing, but the big city problem that tends to just be like, well, we accept it and we look away. But it wasn't that long we weren't that way.
We weren't that way. But also when I go to Toronto, it's so much worse than it ever was.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I think
I've been downtown. I'm going to downtown Montreal next week, and I haven't been to Toronto for a while. So you get skewed in your view of things, right?
Yeah, and it's but there's a specific, the scourge of fentanyl and what it's done for people, for a segment of the population is just devastating to see, and you see it every day.
Yeah, and these are real things that we're going to have to work through because
Yeah.
we're continuing to grow. Some of the forecasts on Calgary numbers they kind of blow you away a little bit.
Yeah, and so
Like, we're not done. We're going, right?
So we had 100,000 people come to Calgary last year, and that number is expected to dip to something 25,000 for 2025.
Is that what the number is? Okay, I hadn't
Yeah,
heard a
but
current
still,
number.
think about it. That's 125,000 people in 2 years.
Yeah, there's not like an imaginary line at the end of the 100,000 and you're starting over again. It compounds on itself.
And we know the pressure that was put on housing, healthcare, infrastructure, schools, everything, daycares. That's been a pressure point. And so we really have to think about how do we make sure we have the housing, how do we have the transit, how do we make sure that we're a city that's welcoming and supportive of everybody who comes here and gives them opportunity.
Ooh, I don't know if we have enough time in this podcast to tackle that. What you kind of
It's
folded.
complicated.
It is complicated, and the biggest risk we can do is oversimplify it.
Yeah.
Oh, just do this and it'll solve.
Yeah, no.
Thinking about downtown and office space. Let's go back to the business community for a second.
Yeah.
Obviously, the world of working from the office, we've pulled a lot of people back, but it just feels like that also is not going to go back to what it ever was again before.
Yeah, we used to have, I think it was 100,000 people would come into downtown Calgary every day.
Okay.
And that number's not that number
it's not-
anymore.
okay, it's not that number anymore.
Partly because of the energy sector downturn, but also because people are working remotely.
Yeah.
But you are seeing when COVID did start to ease, Calgary foot traffic downtown was amongst the highest of all the major cities.
Oh, interesting. In
Yeah,
terms of
so
like we want to get back.
We wanted
at
to
it.
get back. We wanted to see people.
The energy sector loves to have you in the office. Let's be
well,
blunt.
some never really let
the-
anybody
they-
go home.
No, they didn't. Yes, we won't name names, but I've had a few conversations like, no, this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And I think that is a little bit of a to each his own, but there's an impact. And you're right.
Yeah.
The commercial real estate across many, many cities, which was the kind of bellwether of like, oh, you can always trust in commercial real estate. That's changed.
Well, I think in a very strange way. So I often say that 10 years late, oil price crashes late 2014, 2015. At that time, everybody in Calgary, first thing they do in the morning, they look at what WTI is. What's West Texas trading at? What does that mean for my day, my investment, my whatever I'm doing, my presentation?
It was
I
very
need to
singular
know. It was
focused,
very
yeah.
singular focused. So bottom falls out of the market, and all of a sudden, the city of Calgary is exposed in the context of how much it relied on the tax base downtown in the office towers. Values
There's a
plummet,
cascading effect, yeah.
and that's something that they have to reckon with. Post-COVID, that's what the major cities in the United States are dealing with.
Oh,
New
interesting.
York thought it always had the same tax base. San Francisco thought the same thing. Chicago, Detroit, we know what happened to Detroit. And now we have been seen as a poster child in terms of how we have addressed that downtown office vacancy in the office conversions, how that model works, how people are looking at the opportunities presented by creating housing in the vacant office buildings in the downtown
Are we far
core.
enough down? Like, we're the role model of we're doing it.
Yeah.
But are we far enough down to really see it? Have we extrapolated far enough on the graph to see it play out?
Well, I think it's taken time because there's a time factor in terms of how long it takes
It's a
you to
very
actually
physical
convert.
thing
It's
to
a
do.
physical
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
We're starting to see the buildings open, and by the end of the year, I actually don't know what the number is going to be, but we'll have a number of buildings online.
Okay. I've kinda lost track of where we are
Yeah,
on that journey.
I have too. I can't remember exactly, but I think the narrative is we moved from talk to action the fastest.
We are so good at that, aren't we?
Because we've had to be.
Yes, totally.
When you think about, like, I was reflecting on this last week as markets were doing their dance, their wild dance.
Yeah, pogo stick.
Is this my sixth downturn? Is this my sixth market meltdown? I've lost track. But because of Alberta and its unique position, we've had to figure out how to get out of a hole more often than any other city in the country. Maybe other than with
The extreme swings, which are the boom and bust cycle. But you're right, you get practice, you get resilient.
Yeah, and you figured
you've
out
got a few rounds. You're used to you know that punch is probably going to hurt, but you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's why when you look at what's happening across the country, we've been walking on this path more than once, and I would argue that the path that we've been on since 2014 should be seen as one that other cities will have to be thinking about in terms of economic diversification and how do you make sure that you've got a resilient economy that
And
is
not
not
taking it for
so
granted.
you're not taking it for granted, and it's not sort of singularly exposed to one sector or country.
I've often talked on the show about, Alberta, and we're unique, and we're this, and we have hustle, and we do those things. Is it because of that cycle, do you think? Because always the going back to like, how do we get this way? To make sure we never lose it. Is it that up and down? Is it that yo-yo that we've just been on?
Well, we've been on a yo-yo, so that's sort of built a lot of resilience and fortitude. And actually, somebody said something to me interesting last week. They said, Canadians can tolerate a lot more pain than Americans can. And we'll sort of double down and just figure out how to get through some tough patches, whereas you'll see a lot more squawking when things
fair.
get challenged.
That's fair.
So I think that's part of it. But also just think about how the energy sector came to be. We had so many people, especially at the early start of it, mortgaging their houses, asking their friends and family to give them some money, throwing it all into the ground, everybody thinking, well, sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it won't, sometimes the commodity prices are going to work against you, sometimes they'll give you a very handsome return.
Most people would just walk away right about that point of the conversation.
But there was that entrepreneurial spirit. I'm going to risk this.
It almost felt more maverick than entrepreneurial, actually. I've kind of had that. It's like,
Maybe.
were we entrepreneurial, or were there a bunch of mavericks that had entrepreneurial tendencies, which I kind
Or
of I like
you
playing
had
like
a
that.
certain amount of knowledge and you had
Yeah.
confidence in it, and you had people who believed in what you wanted to do. And that's how we
It's a great formula
grew.
right there.
It worked.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of that risk-taking mindset is still here, and in different sectors now. It's not just energy. That whole landscape's changed too. You can't mortgage your house and ask your friends and family, because the cost of drilling wells is
completely
just beyond where it was.
Yep.
But the tech sector's different, and all the startup community's different, and you have that mentality that's still resident, that is willing to look at at these different sectors and these different companies in a way that they wouldn't have done, let's say, 10 years ago. It's been hard to say. People were like, yeah, I'm going to invest in your new energy company. Great, because I know what the break even is and I know what the numbers are, blah, blah, blah.
Risky or not, I'm familiar.
Right.
I'm familiar with this risk.
And tech, this new sort of diversification play, regardless of sector, is different. The payoffs takes longer. Sometimes it's something Dr. Chen Fong calls it venture philanthropy, because you just don't know what you're going to get, if you're going to get anything back. But the point is that people are that mindset is there, and you're seeing more than ever that sort of the energy sector focus of, well, I'm not going to do that, so let's support this.
And are you seeing that even through the chamber conversations with family offices, with some of that,
Yeah.
let's just call it Alberta money,
Yeah.
that's made its money over here, going, yeah, maybe we're not going to go all in, but we're going to allocate a portion of our portfolio.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So many of the family offices looking for ways to support the startups. And, again, the one principle that hasn't changed, it's about ideas and it's about people. And if you've got the management team that you can trust and you believe in, and you really think that they've got the tools that they need to grow a business and be successful, you'll back that management
Some of the
team.
same fundamentals still
Doesn't
and
change.
do they have hustle? Yeah.
Yeah.
So thinking about even 21, 22, when there was a bit of a fervor and there was like high valuations and you get X amount of millions from a good presentation deck and some of those
Yeah.
colorful things.
Yeah.
Where are we now? Because that feels like it's slowed a little bit and we've kind of leveled out, which is always good. Frothy isn't good and dark
No.
isn't good. Somewhere in the middle. We just tend to shoot past the middle very often, I find, just
Yeah,
as a
maybe
culture.
just a little too much.
Boom, boom. Which again, maybe that's our thing. Up and down. What are you seeing now in terms of where that level set is between what's happening in the startup space? Like, I need the money and I'm willing to invest. How are the scales of justice going in that
It depends.
price? Okay.
I think it depends on what you're doing. Like,
Okay.
I think when you see who's been funded from a clean tech perspective, that's a great story. Like, you look at a company like Summit Nanotech.
You took the words out of my mouth because they just I think
They
closed
just
34,
raised, they
34
just,
and a half.
but
Yeah.
they, one of their investors is Temasek, Singapore Wealth Fund, Sovereign Wealth Fund. I mean, that tells you that we're actually doing something different and that has
getting
legs,
the
so to
attention
speak.
of someone who can put their attention anywhere. Globally is where their attention
Right.
goes. And they
So
picked.
capital goes to where it can get the best possible return,
Yes,
right? And
yes.
so people are
You
looking.
can trust it for that usually.
Well, and they scour the world for opportunity, and same thing with Ever, the geothermal company that's now doing a big pilot in Germany
Okay.
and in Chile, and Summit's also doing the same thing in Chile. So we are on the radar for what's happening. So again, it depends on what you're doing. The other thing, what's interesting is we're, I think, the fourth largest financial sort of center in the country.
Okay.
And this is also, so when you talk about the fintech that's happened here, whether it's Neo and others, there's also other interesting platforms. This is the city where we started the flow through shares. This is the city where we started special warrant deals. This is
Going
the
back
city
to
where
what did we learn from our sector?
yeah, but
right?
look at what we developed to raise capital. Capital formation, very important. How do we do that so that there's a win for the company and win for the investor? And then, of course, there was the royalty trusts. That started all in Alberta. So we've always been financial innovators as well. And I think that's something we often forget.
Because it's just so easy to point to, oh, it's energy, but everything that
No.
comes around that.
Yeah,
And all this, and all the, what are the auxiliary skills?
Yeah.
What are you really good at that you kind of almost take for granted? And I'm saying that very tritely, but it's easy to take for granted the thing, your core competencies.
Well, and I think you forget that your core competencies can be applied in many different ways. People get stuck in a silo and they say, well, I'm good at X. And in this context,
What do you mean, Dad? What do you mean?
take that skill and apply it somewhere else. You'll get this, it'll probably morph somewhat, but it is just as applicable in energy as it is in tech, as it is in ag, as it is in logistics and transportation.
Gives me a
We
lot of
forget that.
optimism talking to you. I'm feeling excited about this, as I tend to be. I know I like to have real conversations, but the news handles the negative. Talk to me a little bit about as you were talking. I'm thinking about the chamber's role and like Calgary Chamber, but we talked about Germany. You talked about things that are going on in South America. Where do you guys play in that space with some of our companies here? I've had lots of people on. I'm like, do you have any Calgary customers? They're like, try again. I'm like, Canada. They're like, try again. I'm like, US, try again. Europe. Yes, we have lots of European customers. Talk to me about that balance and where the chamber fits in on that.
So that's really an interesting conversation because how many times do we have our members come to us and say, we've got this great product. We think we can sell to another Canadian company, to a government, and inevitably, or too often, I would say, they go to another supplier that is either outside the province or outside the country. And there's a weird inferiority complex that if it's made here, is it really as good as it could be off the shelf somewhere else? So that's a mindset that we have to really work hard to change. There's a great company in town called Showpass. They're basically positioned to, be a Ticketmaster kind of provider. And it's still, they're the Calgary company. They're not Ticketmaster. They've been passed over by domestic.
That's an interesting phenomenon. You're not the only one who's brought it up.
It's puzzling. They should be the ticket platform for Canadian events, period. Why not?
Because that familiarity breeds contempt or something, I heard some saying, and I was like, and it is interesting of like, we look abroad for something that we have in our yard.
Yes.
It's on our shelf, so it's not that.
So it can't
I'm
be
gonna go out
that
for dinner.
special.
I have this here. I'm going to go out because it'll be better.
Yeah.
There is something about that. That's interesting.
It's weird.
Is
And
that a
so
Canadian thing?
I think
What
it's
is that? What is that?
I think it's a Canadian thing because I think the Americans are like, oh yeah, that was created here. Let's use it. Europeans do the same thing. Swedes do the same. Like everybody does it, but we just don't sort of support our own as well as we should.
Too humble for our own good.
We did with BlackBerry. That was a big disappointment.
It's true.
Everybody still misses the
Isn't it
keyboard.
love, like you've never been heard and Dan's like no one's watching? Sometimes you have to move on from that. So in the chamber's role, do you play in that space or does that kind of go off to another group to go?
I mean, we will try as best we can to
Okay.
make sure that procurement decision includes the local companies that could fit the need of whoever's looking for that particular product.
And is that part of your getting in there and stewarding those introductions?
We connect, we convene.
Whatever
We're
it takes.
matchmakers,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, okay.
We are the connectors and the conveners of the Calgary business community, and we do it within the community. We also do
Since
it
1891, yeah.
Since 1891. We also do it with
Blows me away, that number.
well, me too. I just kind of think, wow, we've been around through so many business cycles. So one thing that tells me is that we'll get through this one too, whatever it brings.
Yes.
But it is something that we work very hard on. We also work with government because we know that if a company that's been created with a product that has a compelling proposition, also important that government could buy that product. And when they can say, if they start to market outside the city, the province, the country, you go and say, well, the government of Alberta, the city of Calgary, the government of Canada
I've heard
has
those
bought our
complaints
product.
that sometimes it's like, why do we
I've
make...
got that first big order from a very important entity.
Yes.
That changes the conversation and helps them move forward. And I think that's the other piece that we have to talk about is just that that government procurement strategy supporting what's developed here, not just in Alberta, but this is a cross-Canada challenge.
You're not the only one who's brought that up. I've often heard said, and we've joked about it on the show, there's a big lineup in Alberta to be second. People are very reluctant to be first, to try that new thing or buy that new product.
Yeah.
Or, well, sure, that sounds great, but has anyone else I know bought it?
I actually remember using that phrase in
Okay,
one
good.
of
I'm not
my.
alone on that one.
No, we like to be we like to be first to be second.
Yes.
And it's time that we take ourselves out of that mindset and say, you know what, it's time to be first.
And are we getting better, or is it still a legitimate thing?
I think what we're experiencing right now is going to have a transformative effect
Don't waste a good
on the
crisis.
mindset of people that are, young, that are in business at the beginning of their careers, mid-career, some others that are sort of on the back nine, different conversation.
Yep, that's fair.
But I do think
Back nine.
it's a nice way to put it.
It's very nice. It's very kind. It's very kind.
I think this
You're
is
close
like,
to the clubhouse. It's working out.
I've never sensed the kind of urgency about diversifying our markets, really focusing on what we have in terms of our capabilities in this country and selling that and monetizing it and doing so much more from an economic diversification standpoint. This is unprecedented to me. And like I said, I've lived through a few of these.
That level of optimism when you're like, okay, great, that's kind of, things that we accepted to be, and our customer that was our, come on, we've all read case studies about having too much wrapped up in one customer. This is not a new phenomenon.
You don't do it for your stock portfolio. I'm sorry.
You don't do it ever because it will bite you. The mechanisms of the way Confederation, the way we are province to province, is it as easy as let's do it different, or is there a lot of layers? And I know maybe you're not an expert in in Confederation law. Why can't we? Like, what's holding us back? Because as an entrepreneur, I'm like, get out of the way, let's do it. And I was like, whoa, it's not that easy. I'm like, well, is it?
It should
I don't know.
be.
You just became the de facto expert, by the way.
Like, I'm not the expert, but it should be. And I actually think, let's just sort of take an example.
Okay.
We have 13 separate securities regulators across the country. Do we need that? No. Have we figured out a way to work together so we can make sure that capital formation happens as efficiently as it needs to? 100%. You have a system of mutual reliance, you have a passport system, and so if you're accredited in one province, you're accredited in another province.
So we have examples of where we figured it out.
Right. So why can't we do that from a healthcare standpoint? Why can't we do that from a trucking standpoint? Why can't we do that from a mental health standpoint? You can't, as a
You can literally go down the list.
You can go down the list, and you should be able to offer services, and you should be able to go from one side end of the country to the other and not have any hiccups in terms of your ability to, take a job in another province. And right now, it's not so easy. And shame on us. I think that there's a willingness amongst premiers to really address this. There's certainly a willingness at the federal government level, finally, because we're our own worst enemy. If we can actually help ourselves trade within the provinces, it shouldn't be easier to sell into the United States than it is within the country. But it is right now in many instances.
Sounds kind of ridiculous when you say it out loud, especially under the light of today's kind of rhetoric.
Yeah, the curtain's been pulled away.
And we're going to be careful to not get into political because this is coming out on May 5th. And there's an election coming right before
yes,
that.
there is.
So
Okay,
we're going to be very cautious on what we
Yeah.
predict and what we don't say. But is there an appetite? Because there's a frustration and pain. Don't waste a good crisis. And Churchill, or that's been around forever in one version of another. But yet it needs pain for us to move. Usually, we're complacent. Just the water runs this way. We'll just follow the river this way. Is there enough this time? And to your point, we probably even haven't seen we've just seen the beginning of it.
Yeah. I would say I'd like to look at Calgary as the example of what's possible. We talked a lot about diversification, and I think Alberta as a province, actually, because that sort of diversification mentality has really taken root in the province, in the two major cities, to make sure that we sort of diversify our economic base.
We're too small to fight with each other, like the Calgary and Edmonton effort, but we love to. But we're too small to not be collaborative in the ways that matter.
That's we figured out how to do that at a very difficult time, starting in 2014, and so. That's an example of what is possible when you put your mind to it and you have people that actually set aside self-interest and say, okay, what's best for my city, my province, my country? Let's set that aside. This is about country first. What do we do? Let's make because everybody benefits.
It's a great narrative.
We all benefit.
Yes, we do. But can we? And will we? And we won't answer that here today. So it's a fun question to pose.
But we need to.
Yes.
Like I said, shame on us if we don't. And if the economy starts to suffer because we couldn't sort of get out of our own way, that's, as my kids say, it's an issue, not an ish me.
Yes, but yet none of us are on this little imaginary magic island over here. We're all on it together.
Yeah.
And I'm very optimistic, and I'm very pro Alberta, and that our ability to, I grew up in Eastern Central Canada. It was great, but I go here, and all of a sudden I'm like, the opportunity, the energy, the entrepreneurial spirit, like it is you can taste it here. But how do we then use that to leverage on a bigger scale when some parts of Canada, and again, let's just call it, institutions love to protect the institutions sometimes, not always the greater good of all constituents, which usually often means you got to blow something up.
Well, yes, and we can think about some of the things that might be on the agenda in Quebec.
Yes,
but I would
yeah, you know what we're talking about without talking about it, yeah.
But, you raised an interesting point, because I would argue that, in as much as Alberta is sort of known as an entrepreneurial, let's get it done, let's figure this out, Quebec's also got a very entrepreneurial culture.
Yep.
And
it feels and shows up differently, but yeah, I wouldn't downplay that, yeah.
That's what I was going to say. It's not the same, but it is the same in other ways.
Yeah, you're right.
The risk sort of mentality, how do you invest, how do you grow, different but same.
And the government in Quebec, I grew up in Quebec, so I've got lots of views on that, especially being an English speaker, growing up in a crazy province with lots of things. But the Quebec government, in a lot of ways, they meddle. In a lot of other ways, they support in some of the right areas that really are catalysts for some of their development, technology, the arts programs. There's some really good things to point to in that market that we could learn from.
The amount of money that they
I get some
poured
hate mail
into
for saying that, but I'm going to say
no. But the amount of money, like they're not afraid to spend money to make money and to make those big investments, and they just did that in AI.
And you can point to
And
it
it's
now.
huge.
And go, oh, isn't it lucky they have that?
Yeah.
Somebody somewhere made a decision to do that.
That's a long-term bet, and that's a real long-term bet.
I would say at this point they bet well.
Yeah.
I'll give them props on it.
And we have Quantum City, at the Alberta government it supported that creation of Quantum City. It's the University of Calgary, University of Alberta, and University of Lethbridge. That's also a forward-looking investment.
I had Michelle Lee on the show, and that was really interesting to me to chat. Like, that was just kind of opening up a whole, like, what am I even looking at right now? That was really interesting. Quantum just makes your brain go pop.
Well, quantum for me, it's about all the things that you can do from a calculation standpoint and what that means from an efficiency and a productivity perspective. Yeah. Great. I'm waiting for quantum peopling so I can be in two places at once.
All things, when you ask your question, it's just all happens simultaneously.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, well, let's not get into quantum entanglement and all the things that, the Deb somewhere else is experiencing exactly what the Deb here is, but in a different way. What gets you excited and optimistic about the road ahead? And then also, what are some of the roadblocks? So we're gonna play both of those kind of angles of this question.
Well, I'm optimistic about the road ahead because there's so many good ideas, and there's a lot of willingness to see what's possible. From an Alberta standpoint, from a Calgary standpoint, as I said before, we know how to roll up our sleeves. We know how to look through the noise. And we know what we need to do to make sure that we get through whatever challenges are ahead of us, and that we'll be better for it when
we can take a hit.
Yeah, the volatility ends.
Yeah.
The other thing, what makes me excited is think about all the multi-generational investments that are happening in the city right now. Mm-hmm. There's the Event Center and the Rivers District. There's the Glenbow Museum. That is the only free museum in Canada because of the generosity of the Shaw family. We have the Arts Commons project, the largest reinvestment and redevelopment of arts infrastructure in Canada. And that's not insignificant.
I love what you said about generational investments. These aren't quick hits. These are big investments now, big lifts that 30 years from now we'll all look back and go, oh, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, isn't that great that we risk that capital? That the Green Line's going to go ahead. We also have the Prairie Economic Gateway that's going to really sort of support that idea.
There's a lot going on. You're right.
Leveraging the inland port. You have CPKC headquartered here, access through the United States into Mexico. So there's so much that's on the horizon for Calgary, and we're investing in ourselves. I think for a while, we'd lost it. We didn't want to take those risks. There was a lack of certainty. There was just kind of like we lost our moxie for a while.
Remember the Olympic, what was that, plebiscite?
Oh, please.
That was kind of a shenanigan, that whole thing.
Well.
And that was a time that I felt like no one wanted to invest, like short term. And that was
going to cost too much.
I'm going to point, not to bring up some past laundry, but that was an interesting dynamic that I think got out into the public and not positioned in the right way. And we had short term thinking there.
There was a lot of
short term thinking. I was going to point to what I think,
and there was a lot of misinformation.
Yeah, it was.
And all of a sudden we start to hear about the challenges. And in full disclosure, I was on the wind sport board, so I knew.
Okay, so you had a ringside seat.
We needed. I knew what money we needed from infrastructure dollars for the oval, for the sliding track, and having the Olympics here would still having the only site that was actually functional relative to other places that had held the Winter Olympics. This was a huge opportunity to reinvigorate really important infrastructure, and the narrative that took hold was mind-boggling.
It was.
People whose kids had learned how to ski at Windsport were saying, well, I don't want my tax dollars to go to this. But your kid benefited from it.
It's such an example of
small-minded
I
can
see
you
here,
be?
I don't see here.
It was just amazing.
What year was that?
I've forgotten because I was so
blocked it out,
upset
you
by
blocked
it.
it
No,
out.
I'm serious. I am. I just remember sitting.
So I touched on it. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
just as you were talking about when we weren't prepared to invest and when we had that short-term mindset, it's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, but that's a really good example, and we're going to pay for it. We're paying for it now because that infrastructure. We're still talking about finding money to fix
still
the Olympic
talking about
Oval.
it, yeah.
We still need money for that, and it's still best ice on the planet. People want to come here to skate and to compete, and we can't get our act together to make sure that the money we need to revitalize that piece of infrastructure is there. It's shameful.
And you saw that narrative start to happen around the event space, like around the new arena. Like there was a lot of that similar, but it seemed to kind of get caught. And then, like you said, you just rhymed off a whole list of substantial projects, like in the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going forward.
And of course, we have that wonderful library.
Which everybody points to and go, isn't it amazing?
It's
and
beautiful.
It is amazing.
When it opened, it was the most anticipated opening of a public building in North America.
That's awesome.
Because of the design. It's beautiful. So there's a lot that we have to be proud of, and there's so much on the horizon. I think that's what's really exciting.
It's funny, I had Alex Syrian on
did
a
you?
while back,
Oh,
right,
wow.
not long after he was in town. And I said, why? Like, why did you come here? From New York and kind of his background.
Yeah.
And he goes, I came and kind of walked around. I wasn't sure. And he goes, then I went to the library. It was great. And he was very, very candid about it. And so I was like, come on, like, let's speak the truth between us. Like, you left New York City in the role that you're in to come to Calgary. And he's like, yeah. And he kind of pointed at the library and was like, oh, okay, I see where we're headed now. And it was great. It was an awesome, very very optimistic Calgary moment. But it stuck out of my mind because he called it the library.
Well, the funny thing about Alex is the other piece that he often says to me is, I can't believe how much time I spend selling Calgary to Calgarians about all the things
That's funny. I believe that.
that are going for us.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Where are we still getting in our own way? Do we have enough time?
Well, sometimes we still get into that sort of mindset of it's going to cost too much, therefore we shouldn't do it. I think that Green Line conversation has been sort of one of those
It has.
conversations. But if
Show
you
me
want,
a major center that doesn't have good transportation infrastructure.
you're
from
not a
public
major
side.
city if you don't have
No, you
good
don't.
transportation
You're just not even in the game,
infrastructure.
right? Let's be blunt.
And I think the other thing is that we talk about the need for affordable housing. You can have cheap housing on the fringes of the city, but if it is not connected to transportation infrastructure, it's a Pyrrhic victory. And if we want to have people here that feel like they're part of the city, they need to be connected by transit. Just think about when you go to a major city in the United States or in Europe or Toronto, you can walk and walk and walk. And then when you get tired from walking, you jump on a streetcar, you
100%.
jump on the subway.
If you've traveled at
and
all,
you get
you
home.
recognize the benefit of travel
You
in these
get
massive
home. And you
infrastructure.
you create street life, not car
Back
life.
to 15 floors and below, or 15 feet and below is where innovation actually happens,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a street life, not a car life.
Calgary is a car city.
And we are a car city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, we're moving, we're growing.
We're growing. We're getting there.
What else? What else is on your list? I know you got a few things on your list. Em.
Well, I think that we're a city that benefits from having a really, really great post-secondary system. And the people that come here and the research that's being done, the University of Calgary is top 5 in terms of research institution. We have a new Calgary Cancer Center, which is the second largest integrated.
That needs to be celebrated more and more. There's so many layers to that. It's so good.
You know what that
It's so good.
represents from
Wendy and her whole team around there and what
Yeah.
they've done is fabulous.
It's the second largest integrated cancer center in North America. That's a good story.
It is a good story.
And that's also another leg of the economic diversification that can happen. So, I mean, that's an example where we didn't get, we just decided we needed to do this and we
We
got
kinda
it-
rolled up
we
our
got it
sleeves and
done.
got her
We
done.
it
Yeah, yeah.
I think sometimes we don't stop to listen to what some of the concerns of, other Canadians. I mean, I think sometimes we like to answer questions with too many facts and not enough stories.
I've always believed we've had a bit of a storytelling problem here, for sure. As a marketer, I will camp out on that one a little bit. Yeah.
So we need to tell our story better and showcase what's possible here without all the, why don't you believe us? Because here are all the numbers. That's what should matter.
They beat you with the facts.
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
People want a values-based conversation about what you stand for and why it's important to them.
I do think the word's getting out, though. Those 125,000 people didn't move here just because it was the only option.
True.
So it's
Yeah.
slowly, for sure. I
Yeah.
agree with you, but I've run into different stories in Central. I have lots of friends in Toronto and a lot of friends in Montreal. Montreal, sometimes the oil and gas conversation is a bit spicy because they have a perspective, but I feel the story is maybe out there more than it was even 10 years ago. When you moved where? What's a Calgary?
Yeah, what's a Calgary?
What's a Calgary?
But do you think the Alberta's calling campaign had anything to do with that? They, all of a sudden, here's the quote unquote land of opportunity. Come visit. Maybe you'll stay. You'll find something to do
Yeah.
that will sort of
Come
fill
for a
your
meeting and move here for a lifetime. I've heard those stories too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Absolutely.
And so people, I often say there's a generation of people that came here in the 1980s, right? They're the generation of 1982, graduated from university, out east, came here, said, I'll just stay here for a while and then I'll go back east, and they're still here.
Yeah.
But they've been a big reason why the city is what it is today.
You mentioned post-secondary. How are we, from your perspective, how's our post-secondary and our commercial sector? Are we getting better at hanging out together? Taking it out of the lab and getting it onto the bench and then into the field, that's a journey.
It is a journey.
With
and
individuals that speak different languages sometimes.
Yes, one needs to understand the time value of money, and the other one needs to understand the time value of research. And sometimes
Well said. I've never heard that.
sometimes
Very well said,
there's
Deb. Very well said.
No meeting.
Ships passing in the night
yeah,
sometimes.
it's like, what are you talking about? But I think, Creative Destruction Labs has done a lot to sort of take down those barriers and bridge the gap, but also Innovate Calgary. And just the fact that we have more visibility in the community, because increasingly, so let's just dial that back for a second.
Sure.
If you're in the States and you have a problem, you're a company that's trying to solve something that's vexing, you're going to go look at a university that has expertise in the particular area that you're trying to solve. For some reason, Canadian universities have never been seen as the problem solvers for industry. I think Calgary, the University of Calgary, U of A as well, are increasingly seen as places where those problems can be solved. And there's a willingness to meet in the middle and say, how can we work together? I don't think it's in place everywhere. It's definitely, you probably have some of it. You have it in Toronto, in Waterloo, but it's not something that's ubiquitous. And I think we have to do better at recognizing how important post-secondaries generally are for economic growth and what that means. Because great cities have great universities.
Well, the Montreal AI story is rooted heavily in what was, I think I've heard it said you can point to actually a specific professor who kind of took that initiative forward.
Same thing in Edmonton,
Yeah.
at the University of Alberta.
That's an
right?
undertold story as well.
That's part of it. That was a big bet, though, right? That's a 10-year-old. That's a bet that was taken in the early 2000s. And so sometimes you have to also have the patience.
Patient capital is a whole other conversation I've had too, where we want it quick, but that's not necessarily like
No.
what game. It's good to know what game you're playing before you pick your timeline.
There's two words carved in one of the doors in the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence.
Okay.
Festina lente. Make haste slowly.
That could just be your mic drop moment right there.
My dad used to tell me that all the time when I was a
Make
kid.
haste slowly.
So just slow down.
I think I've always wrestled with the slowly part. I'm getting older. I look at things a little more broadly, or I try to. I aspire to. My wife will hear me say that and go, really? Are you sure that was what you were talking about yourself? Magic wand. I often like to ask this question. If you could wave a magic wand, it's your magic wand, so you could do anything with it. In reference to making this better in some way, or knocking something out of the way, what would you do with your magic wand in Alberta?
Oh my gosh. I would, first of all, I would deal with the mental health and addiction issues and the safety issues and find dignity and support for people who need it that we see every day.
Dignity is a good word.
It just makes me sad every single day when I'm downtown and I see people struggling. So that would be one thing. The other thing would be that I would increase access to post-secondary education.
Okay.
I would increase, work integrated learning opportunities for students.
I like that a lot.
And I would make sure that we had a new football stadium.
Oh, I love you putting it. It's your magic wand. I'm glad you used it for something that you care about.
We have the worst football stadium in the country.
It's not awesome. No, it's not
it's
awesome.
terrible. I mean, we are such a sports-minded city, right?
Well,
and
if anyone's going to do it, I think Jay will do it. He's a great guy. I've chatted with him lots. He's got lots of energy for that team and that organization. So referring to Jay McNeil.
Yeah, Jay McNeil,
Everyone does know Jay, but I know you do.
Well, there's Jay
I'm
McNeil,
forgetting
but-
there's people listening that might not know Jay.
No, but there's Jay McNeil, and of course there's the Honourable Lois Mitchell, whose late husband Doug Mitchell was the former CFL commissioner.
Yes. So we've got some ties.
We've got
know
some
people. We
ties,
know
and
some
I
people.
think we could have a football stadium that reflected his legacy as well. I've said that for a while, but I think so magic wand and transportation infrastructure that serves the city, because there is a generation, my kids are part of it. They don't want to be so car dependent. They want to be able to have one car and not have to use it every day. And we have to recognize that
Things are changing.
Things are changing. Like some of us, okay, we grew up taking a car for granted, but not everybody's going to do that. So let's think about that next generation.
What we want is starting to matter a bit less, though, isn't it?
Right.
Someone the other day was in there. I was talking to an older friend. He's like, I don't care about this and AI. I'm like, with all due respect, we're not really the ones that are going to be adopting and using these new technologies.
No.
Nobody likes to hear that, but I think we also have to keep our eyes on what's coming and get with the program a little bit.
So you talked earlier about, the brain drain. We want to be this, everybody's competing for talent. It doesn't matter where you are in Canada, in the States, in Europe, people want people and they want technology, they want smarts.
Yep.
And so how do we be the place that people come to? And what do we need to do? And it is turning on its head some of the things that we thought were important.
That's a good way to put it.
They're not the same.
We need to have what
it's not
they
the same
expect
thing.
to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Including the arts and including, we can't just keep pointing at the mountains and Stampede and say, we got a great party and the mountains are close. There's more to it than to have a livable city.
well, I think, the Glenbow, and I
Mm-hmm.
think Arts Commons, and we have a thriving arts community. Do they need to be better supported financially? Yes, that's been an issue for a very
I think
long
the buildings
time.
are great, but the people that are in the building doing the thing also need to have some support as well, for sure. Yeah.
And we need to grow the audiences, and I mean, it's an ongoing
It's all,
challenge.
it's all the things, yeah, absolutely.
But imagine a world without music.
No.
No.
No, I refuse. No. I have a house with the music on all the time.
Right?
And they can change our mood in a second. When you see individuals coming into the city thinking about that brain drain, but think about the other way around. I've had a few startups on recently that they're like, hey, I was convinced I moved here. And
Yeah.
it was like they met someone from RBCX and then they met someone from Platform. And next thing you know, they're moving here.
Yeah.
Do they find their way to the chamber as well?
They do. Yep.
I would imagine pretty quickly.
Yeah,
Because they're
we
looking
make
to build
sure
community right
yeah.
away.
And we have, we have events that our events are selling out. Just
That's
a little
awesome.
plug there, yeah. But we
Yeah.
have something called Business After Hours. If you don't sign, as soon as we launch those events, they're after work. They're once a month. If you don't sign up right away, you're gonna,
So, a little
you're gonna be out
a
of
lineup
luck.
at a restaurant makes you curious. Like, what's going on in there? What am I missing
yeah,
out
a lot
on?
of things. So that's just one place where we really bring people together. But there's myriad events that we hold and workshops.
There's a lot of
and-
great events in the city. Like sometimes
Yeah.
it's like it's the wayfinding of where should I be and
Yeah,
because it
and-
can be you're birthing a company and you need to go to events. Like it can be tough for sure.
Yeah, you need to
And
figure
don't
out.
forget you have a family and you have to go to the gym and you have to eat and you have to sleep. I
Yeah.
guess maybe eventually.
There are only so many hours in a day.
And are you
Yeah.
still seeing an influx of companies coming in and people like of all sizes coming into Calgary because access to things that they need to be a successful startup?
Access to what they need and also access to the mindset. So we just, a company
I love
just
that.
came to, is landing in Calgary. They're actually headquartered in Australia. They have an office in Toronto and they're going to be
That's a great
be here.
story.
It's a great story
love
because
those
we
stories.
have a mindset that is open to trying new things and, they're actually in the education space,
Okay.
which is really interesting. For what it's worth, Calgary is one of those cities where if you have a child with learning differences, we have probably the best infrastructure to support those kids. And
Things
part
you
of-
just don't know if you're not in that. Like if
So-
you're not exposed to it.
Let me tell you just a little story about that. So there's a school called Calgary Academy, which helps kids with learning differences. And it was started by Jim Gray and Jim Chabot, both of them from Canadian Hunter, because of the challenges they saw their kids having in this traditional school system. And if it wasn't for them starting this school, which is now well known in terms of how it supports kids to deal with give them strategies and be able to succeed in school and beyond, a lot of kids would have been left behind. But it was just this, we have to do this, let's do it, it's important. And just a little known fact about how it all got started.
What I love about that story, even more than what it represents, that you can point to those two individuals, that
Yeah.
that people listening are going to know those individuals,
Yeah.
that they had success and then they put it back in, they
Yeah.
went back to the table
And
and they
there's-
invested. And we're still a small enough and a young enough city that you know those people. I've heard both of them speak,
Yeah.
for Jim speak anyways,
Yeah.
for sure, about that, for sure, in
Yeah.
terms of that perspective. Like, that's the big small town with a lot of oomph behind it.
Yeah.
Which, that's a superpower. That you
It
don't get
is.
in the nameless, faceless, sometimes in the big city.
And you
where
can
just
get a
beer.
connection to Jim Gray.
One coffee away.
One coffee away,
That's
right?
very
Yeah.
very true. Well, Deb, it's been fantastic chatting with you. I've known of you and I've met you and bumped into you,
Yeah.
and it took me 499 episodes to finally get you to come on the show.
I'm honored,
She's
500.
she's been playing hard to get this
Yeah,
whole
right.
time. And really excited. I love having real conversations, but I'm also coming at this from a very optimistic. I'm all in on Calgary and I'm all in on Alberta. And yes, we can continue to do better, but it's a pretty special place.
It is a special
I'm hearing
place.
that. I know
Yeah.
that, and I hear you
So
speak.
let's
and-
win a Stanley Cup.
Okay.
Let's
Is
do it this
still,
year.
Is it still mathematically possible? Is that what I heard last time?
Well, the Oilers can win.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry, that was very limiting in my thoughts. I jumped right to, well, there's only one team you could be talking about after I made my inclusion with Edmonton commentary.
So I figured,
This is
you
where
know,
we're going to
you
get the
say-
hate mails
this
right
is-
in the
this
end,
is-
in
No,
the last
you
5
said we
minutes.
can't compete, so there you go.
Winning it all. Yes, winning is a team sport. Maybe an obvious question. If someone wants to learn more or get involved with the chamber or reach out and have a lovely conversation with you, what's the best path?
CalgaryChamber.com.
Beautiful.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.